The forest was eerily silent that evening, as if nature itself was holding its breath. In the heart of the dense wilderness, a lone bear cub lay curled beneath the towering pines, his small body shivering from exhaustion. His fur, once thick and warm, was matted with dirt, and his breathing was shallow. He was alone, weak, starving, and afraid. No one knew how he had ended up in this desperate state. Perhaps he had lost his mother to a hunter or had wandered too far from his den, unable to find his way back. Whatever the cause, one thing was certain. If help didn't arrive soon, the cub wouldn't survive the night. Fate, however, had other plans. Miles away, deep in the valley where the town met the forest, a man named Daniel was preparing for his usual evening hike. A wildlife conservationist with years of experience, Daniel had always felt a deep connection to nature. He knew the land better than anyone, the hidden trails, the secret streams, and the fragile balance of life that existed within the trees. He had dedicated his life to protecting wildlife, but he never imagined that this night would change him forever. As he ventured deeper into the woods, something caught his attention, a faint rustling, barely audible over the whispering wind. It was a sound of distress, of something struggling to survive. Following his instincts, Daniel carefully stepped off the trail, his eyes scanning the undergrowth. And then he saw him. The sight of the cub stopped Daniel in his tracks. He had encountered many wild animals in his life, but something about this tiny, helpless creature struck him differently. The bear's dark eyes, filled with fear and longing, met his own, and in that instant, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Daniel knew he couldn't leave him behind. Little did he know, this single act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would touch the hearts of many. And years later, when the bear saw him again, it would be a moment no one would ever forget. Daniel's breath hitched as he took cautious steps toward the frail cub. The little bear barely had the strength to lift his head, his body too weak to flee. His ribs pressed against his thin fur, a stark reminder of how long he had been without food. Every labored breath the cub took sent a pang through Daniel's chest. He had seen injured animals before, but something about this helpless creature struck him differently. Kneeling down a few feet away, Daniel spoke in a soft, reassuring voice. "Hey there, buddy," he murmured, not expecting a response, but hoping to ease the cub's fear. The bear blinked, his dark eyes filled with exhaustion. He didn't growl, didn't attempt to move. He had given up. Daniel knew he had to act fast. The night was growing colder, and the cub's condition was worsening by the second. Moving slowly to avoid startling him, Daniel unzipped his backpack, pulling out a water bottle and a granola bar. He poured some water into his palm and held it out. The cub hesitated, his nose twitching at the scent of fresh water. Then, with the last bit of strength he had left, he lapped at it weakly. "That's it, little guy," Daniel encouraged, his heart pounding. Realizing the cub was too weak to move on his own, Daniel made a quick decision. He had to carry him. Carefully, he slid off his jacket and wrapped it around the bear's frail body. The cub didn't resist. If anything, he seemed to relax against the warmth of the fabric. Lifting him gently, Daniel was surprised by how light he was. The bear should have been heavier for his size, but hunger had taken its toll. As Daniel made his way back through the woods, the cub stirred slightly in his arms. His small paw rested against Daniel's chest, as if he instinctively knew he was safe now. The moment was so pure, so unexpected, that Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had never imagined that a simple evening hike would lead to him carrying a helpless bear cub in his arms, but here he was. By the time he reached his truck, the cub's breathing had steadied, his body curled against Daniel's warmth. A bond had already begun to form between them, though neither of them could have known just how much this rescue would change their lives forever. As Daniel drove toward the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, he glanced down at the cub resting beside him and made a silent promise. "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." The first night at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was a quiet one. The cub, wrapped in warm blankets inside a spacious enclosure, slept soundly for the first time in days. Though still weak, he had eaten a small meal and drank more water, signs that he was slowly regaining his strength. Daniel stayed by his side for hours, watching over him like a guardian, making sure he was comfortable. But the little bear wasn't the only one adjusting to a new presence in the center. There was another animal who had taken an interest in the cub, a dog named Max. Max had been Daniel's loyal companion for years. A golden retriever mix with a gentle soul, he had been raised around animals of all kinds, often accompanying Daniel on his rescue missions. But he had never encountered a bear cub before. As soon as Max caught the unfamiliar scent, his ears perked up and his tail wagged with curiosity. He padded toward the enclosure, sniffing the air, his golden eyes filled with intrigue. The cub, however, was not as eager. When he first noticed Max, his small body stiffened. Instinct told him to be wary, though he was too weak to react aggressively. He merely stared at the dog, his dark eyes reflecting uncertainty. Max, sensing the cub's hesitation, didn't push. Instead, he simply sat a few feet away, watching quietly. He understood the importance of patience. For the next few days, he continued to stay near the enclosure, waiting. He would lie beside it during feeding time, his tail wagging gently whenever the cub made eye contact. He never barked or forced an interaction. He just stayed, his presence a silent reassurance. Slowly, the cub began to relax. The first time he inched closer to Max, it was hesitant, his nose twitching as he took in the dog's scent. Max remained still, letting the cub take the lead. The next time, the bear lingered near the fence a little longer. And then, one morning, something remarkable happened. When Daniel arrived with breakfast, he found the cub resting near the fence, his small paw pressed gently against the wire, while Max lay on the other side, mirroring the gesture. The breakthrough came a week later. Daniel decided to carefully introduce them under supervision, letting the cub explore outside his enclosure while Max waited a few feet away. At first, the bear moved cautiously, unsure of this new freedom. But when Max took a step forward, tail wagging in a friendly invitation, something shifted. The cub took a tentative step closer, then another, and before Daniel could fully process it, the bear leaned in, nudging Max with his nose. It was a gesture of trust, a sign that the fear had faded. From that moment on, the two were inseparable. The cub, still small and playful, followed Max wherever he went. If Max rolled onto his back in the grass, the bear would clumsily attempt the same. If Max chased a butterfly through the yard, the bear would bound after him, his tiny paws thudding against the earth. At night, when the temperature dropped, Max would curl up beside the bear, sharing his warmth. Daniel watched it all unfold with awe. He had hoped the cub would recover, but he never expected this. A deep, undeniable friendship between two creatures who, in the wild, would have been unlikely companions. It was a bond formed not from instinct, but from trust, comfort, and the simple power of kindness. And as the days passed, it became clear that the cub was no longer just an animal in need of rescue. He had found a home, a friend, and a reason to thrive again. Days turned into weeks, and what had once been an unlikely companionship blossomed into something extraordinary. The cub, now stronger and more energetic, had become Max's shadow, following him wherever he went. If Max trotted toward the lake, the bear clumsily waddled after him. If Max sprawled out under the shade of a tree, the cub flopped down beside him, mimicking his every move. It was as if the bear had decided that if anyone knew how to live a good life, it was Max. Their playfulness knew no bounds. At first, the cub was hesitant, unsure how to interact with the lively retriever. But Max was patient, teaching the bear through gentle nudges and enthusiastic tail wags. When Max would pounce at a ball and bat it across the yard, the cub watched intently before swiping at it with his oversized paws, sending it tumbling in the wrong direction. The sight never failed to make Daniel laugh. One afternoon, Daniel set up a small obstacle course in the yard for Max, something they had done for years. It was meant to be a game. Jump over logs, weave through cones, and race back. Max, ever the eager learner, zipped through it effortlessly. But what surprised Daniel most was when the cub, after watching Max, made his own attempt. He tripped over the first log, paused, then scrambled over it with determination. The cones were a disaster, knocked over with every uncoordinated step, but by the time he reached the finish line, he let out an excited huff, clearly proud of himself. Max barked and playfully nudged the cub, and Daniel swore he saw the bear grin. Beyond playtime, their bond deepened in ways that were far more touching. If the cub ever felt unsure or scared, he instinctively sought out Max, pressing his nose into the golden retriever's fur. If a sudden noise startled him, Max would stand protectively beside him, offering silent reassurance. And when the cub slept, it was often with his head resting gently on Max's back, their breathing synchronized in peaceful harmony. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Daniel sat on the porch watching the two of them. The cub had grown considerably, his once scrawny frame now strong and healthy. Yet, despite his growing size, he was still the same affectionate, playful companion he had always been. Max was lying in the grass, gazing at the horizon, when the cub approached. Instead of tackling him in their usual playful manner, the bear simply lowered himself beside Max and pressed his forehead against the retriever's. It was a small gesture, one that spoke volumes. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. The cub wasn't just following Max out of habit anymore. He wasn't just playing because it was fun. He had found something deeper in their bond. Comfort, security, a sense of belonging. There was something profoundly beautiful about the way they had chosen each other. They were from different worlds, different species, yet none of that had mattered. What mattered was the connection they had formed, the quiet understanding between them that no words could ever express. And as the stars began to flicker to life above them, Daniel realized something. This wasn't just an animal rescue story anymore. It was a love story, a story of trust, of friendship, of two souls who had found each other against all odds. And that, he thought with a smile, was more magical than anything he could have ever imagined. As the cub grew bigger and stronger, new challenges began to emerge. What had once been a tiny, fragile creature that fit snugly in Daniel's arms was now a powerful young bear with an increasing sense of curiosity and independence. His instincts, though softened by his time with Max, were still deeply rooted in his wild nature. One of the first challenges became apparent when the cub started exploring beyond the safety of the rehabilitation center. He had watched Max roam freely through the fields and woods surrounding the property, and naturally, he wanted to do the same. But unlike Max, who knew the boundaries and always returned when called, the bear had no such understanding. One evening, Daniel stepped outside to find Max pacing anxiously near the tree line, whining softly. The cub was nowhere in sight. A jolt of panic surged through Daniel. Had the bear wandered off too far? Would he know how to find his way back? Grabbing a flashlight, Daniel called out, his voice steady but urgent. "Come on, buddy. Let's go home." Minutes passed, and just as worry threatened to take hold, a rustling sound came from the brush. Then, out of the darkness, the cub emerged, sheepish, slightly muddied, but unharmed. And right beside him, leading him back home, was Max. The retriever had gone after his friend, nudging and guiding him back the way they had come. It was a small but powerful moment, one that reinforced the strength of their bond. Max wasn't just a companion. He was the bear's anchor, his guide through the unfamiliar world. But there were deeper struggles, too. As the cub grew, his instincts occasionally clashed with his domesticated surroundings. One afternoon, while playing in the yard, a sudden loud noise, perhaps distant thunder or a passing truck, startled him. Instinct took over, and in a flash, he reared up on his hind legs, letting out a deep, startled huff. Max, sensing his distress, immediately responded, not with fear, but with calmness. He approached the bear slowly, tail low, eyes gentle. The cub hesitated, his breathing heavy, but when Max brushed against him in a reassuring nuzzle, he let out a deep sigh and settled back down. It became clear that Max wasn't just a playmate. He was the cub's source of stability. Whenever uncertainty arose, Max was there, silently teaching him how to navigate the world in a way that eased his anxieties. As the seasons changed, so did their challenges. The cub's strength was now undeniable, and with it came a natural need for space. Daniel knew that eventually, the bear would have to return to the wild where he truly belonged. But how could he separate two souls that had become inseparable? For now, though, that question remained in the future. At this moment, as the cub curled up beside Max after a long day, nuzzling into the warmth of his best friend, one thing was certain. No matter the obstacles, their bond had only grown stronger. And no challenge could ever take that away. The day Daniel had been dreading finally arrived. For months, he had known it was coming. The moment when the cub, now a fully grown and powerful young bear, would have to return to the wild where he truly belonged. The rehabilitation program had always been temporary, a way to give the bear a second chance at survival. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. Max, as always, sensed the shift before anyone else. In recent weeks, the bear had become more restless, his instincts calling him toward the dense forest that stretched beyond the property. He still played with Max, still curled up beside him on cool nights, but there was a new awareness in his eyes, a pull toward something bigger than the world he had known. The final test came on a crisp autumn morning. Wildlife officials had arrived to assist with the bear's release. They assured Daniel that the location was ideal, far from human settlements, abundant with food, and near a river. It was the perfect place for the bear to thrive. But how could Daniel explain that to Max? As the officials prepared the transport cage, Max paced anxiously, his ears pinned back, his tail low. He knew something was wrong. When the bear was led toward the enclosure, he hesitated, sensing the change, the finality of it all. Then, as if understanding that this was goodbye, the bear turned away from the officials and walked toward Max. The two friends stood face to face, and for a long moment, neither moved. Daniel held his breath. Then, in a gesture that broke everyone's heart, the bear lowered his massive head and gently pressed it against Max's. A silent farewell, a promise never to forget. Max whined softly, but didn't move away. He simply leaned in, accepting what he could not change. A moment later, the officials secured the bear in the transport cage, and as the truck drove away, Max sat motionless, his gaze following his best friend until he disappeared into the trees. Daniel knelt beside Max, resting a hand on his back. "He'll be okay," he murmured, though his own voice wavered. Max didn't move for a long time. Then, finally, he let out a deep sigh, his golden eyes filled with understanding. Their journey together had reached its end, but their bond would never be broken. And somehow, Daniel knew, somewhere in the vast wilderness, the bear would always remember the dog who had been his first and truest friend. The days that followed the bear's release were quiet. Max still wandered to the edge of the property, his golden eyes scanning the tree line as if hoping to catch a glimpse of his friend. Daniel watched him, feeling both the weight of absence and the deep pride in what they had accomplished. Max had not just been a companion. He had been a teacher, a protector, a brother to a creature who had once been lost and afraid. And even though their time together had come to an end, their bond had left an indelible mark, one that not even distance could erase. Months passed, and winter settled over the land. Snow blanketed the ground, the air crisp and still. Daniel had accepted that the bear had moved on, carving his own path in the wild where he belonged. But then, on a quiet morning, something remarkable happened. Max, who had been resting by the porch, suddenly lifted his head, ears perked. He stood up, his body tense with recognition. Daniel followed his gaze toward the tree line, where a massive figure emerged from the shadows. The bear stood there, watching. His coat was thick and healthy, his frame strong. He had adapted to the wild, just as Daniel had hoped. And yet, despite the months apart, despite the distance between them, he had found his way back, if only for a moment. Max didn't hesitate. He bounded forward, stopping just short of the bear, his tail wagging furiously. The bear let out a deep, rumbling huff, a sound of familiarity, of recognition. And then, just as he had done on that last day, he lowered his head and gently pressed it against Max's. Daniel swallowed hard. It was a moment beyond words, a silent acknowledgement of a friendship that had defied all odds. Then, as quickly as he had come, the bear turned and disappeared back into the wilderness. Max stood there for a moment, watching, before finally trotting back to Daniel's side. There was no sadness in his eyes this time, only understanding. Some friendships were never meant to be confined. Some bonds could stretch across any distance. And no matter where life took them, they would always be a part of each other's story. Forever.